Hello, everyone, and welcome to UpStage Talks. My name is Maria Consuelo Gonima, and I am the CEO and founder of Big Smile Co., a marketing communications agency, and the UpStage Directory, which brings us here today. What is the UpStage Directory? Well, it is the world's first directory dedicated to diversifying all panels. And so today, specifically, we will be talking about finding the right audience and digital strategies. Super excited to have with us some experts in these spaces, two very different spaces, but the same sort of tactics and tricks and tips, and you'll see that in our conversation. So first, I'd like to introduce Chris Blackwell.
Hey, I'm Chris Blackwell. So I'm the SVP of Creative Content at Republic Records. I've been at Republic Records for 6 months now. Before that, I was the CEO of a media company called All Def Digital. And before that, I had the pleasure of working with Maria Fullscreen. So what I do now is kind of work with artists on their roster, everyone from Ariana Grande to Post Malone to Weekend, and everything in between, and try to find creative executions for them to explore different creative sides. So usually my job entails meeting with buyers at Netflix, HBO, everything in between, finding those mandates, taking them to the artists, seeing what they really want to do, and then pairing them with the right production company to bring those ideas to life. I also try to find digital executions where we can, whether it be YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, build out our artists' profiles just so their YouTube pages and all that stuff just aren't music videos. So a little bit of everything.
Awesome. And on another side of the spectrum is Trip Yang. Welcome, Trip.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. My name is Trip Yang. I'm a Democratic political strategist. I have worked on 3 presidential election cycles dating back to Obama 2012, Hillary 2016, and recently wrapped up my tour with Bernie 2020 in his presidential primary quest. I've also done elections in 7 states, organizing, managing states at the statewide, citywide, and local levels. And, I have a number of I have a number of clients right now here in New York, especially, that I'm very excited to work with. And the final thing I'll just say is that most of the clients I work with, are Black, Latino, or Asian. Almost everyone fits along that category. That's something that, to your point, diversity is very important to me, and representation, especially in the political space, is very important to me. So it's very exciting for me to be here today.
Thank you so much. So this is our final UpStage Talks in the very introductory stages of our lovely app. Diversity is much more than a buzzword. It's the way people are living. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily know where they fit into those spectrums and how they can leverage their own identity in the conversation of diversity. So with you guys today, I want to talk about sort of the smaller picture. Say I'm someone who's just starting up and I want to leverage some of these big campaign methods that you use on the larger scale. Let's talk a little bit about how identity plays into what you do and how it works with the many different audiences that you're trying to reach. I think, Trip, you started in on some of that. To zero in specifically, I think, you yourself have built an identity, or you have lived through an identity, and you have audiences that you want to relate to through the work that you're doing. How do you figure that out? How do you determine your audience after having determined who you yourself are and how you determine your voice?
Yeah, absolutely. So, with political campaigns, it's all about finding your voice, finding your values, and then learning how to communicate those values to other people, right? So a great example is, if you believe in healthcare coverage, and I personally think that that is critically important given the pandemic and the health crisis we're facing now. If you believe that every American should be insured, if the federal government should be providing that, right? In politics, we call that policy Medicare for all, or it's also called single payer, right? And so some individuals like Bernie Sanders have run on that policy in the past. So you really have to start by really finding out what you believe in, what you value, what you want to push for in society and make these changes in society. That's the first choice, right? And then you have to communicate that to your audience in a very authentic, in a way that's not canned at all. I actually think all the time about this young woman at the time, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. This is early 2017, before she got big, before all of her videos are hyped up and nice production values. I was watching a video of hers in early 2017, so over a year before she really won and made it as a household name. She was just taking something that looked like a selfie video, a dimly lit video in her apartment. But when she spoke directly to the camera, you could just tell she had magnetic energy. You could tell she made such direct appeal to her audience. You could tell that she knew what she was fighting for, her values, and you could tell she was going to go places. So you really have to start with finding the values that you believe in, and then you can communicate that to your audience.
Entertainment is a big place for people to showcase diversity, to showcase their creativity and what their identity means to them. Chris, how do you tackle that with some of the big artists you work with, and how do you see someone working through that journey?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm lucky to have a great team at Republic that really helps brew and make that vision consistent. But for example, The Weeknd's latest album, which was released during the COVID crisis, from the very on, he knew what he wanted to do, what he wanted to be, what he didn't want to be, and was ironically in the time where, I mean, some of his earlier records were more party boy, and then he went a little bit more pop. So for this last album, he really wanted to brand himself as this character that around this after hours characters. And from the first tweet that came out announcing the album to every TV appearance, to every blog post, all this stuff was consistent. So I mean, with him, he even on that big scale, like starting with something, a vision, mood board, all that stuff, and carrying it throughout the whole campaign, which can run from 3 to 6 months. But then on the flip side, so when we're like finding a new artist, like if an artist comes to us that has a brand already or an identity, it just makes that job so much easier. And obviously it's more beneficial for the artist too, because with any project, the more that you've done to establish that voice, that brand identity, the more that you can stay true to yourself. So whether it be with the issues that you stand up against, or with your visual image, like all those things, from the biggest scale like The Weeknd to even the artists we signed very early, are super important in defining your future. So yeah.
Totally. And I think, so there's the individual's identity that they're reaching culturally, that it's, race, ethnicity, sexuality, gender, all these things play into that. And then on the bigger scale, when you're working with a candidate like Bernie Tripp, Bernie impressively was able to speak to so many types of people with so many different types of backgrounds. How do you feel that he and you guys addressed all of those different audiences at once?
So I think that goes to, in the political world, it's about building a coalition. It's coalitional, right? We always, I think of how the Obama campaign was put together in 2008. And I think, if you use the digital technologies in 2008 or the exact same strategies from 2008 into 2020, it would not work, because the world has changed so much in 12 years. But what did work so well in 2008, and why I still think it's viewed as a gold standard, is because Barack Obama that year was able to put a coalition together to an extent that we haven't seen in American politics, right? So, young people were excited by his energy. Folks of color, particularly Black Americans, were very enthusiastic about his candidacy. And, Barack Obama did really well as well with, suburban voters. And he did much better with rural voters that have since, if you're a Democrat, they've since left your party in the 12 years since. So when you look at 2020, Bernie's campaign had the benefit of looking at where he did well with young voters, and where he where he did well with voters in 2016, where he struggled with a little bit. So you could kind of tell, like to your earlier question as well, Maria, about finding your audience, Bernie has always done very well with young voters, right? So folks under the age of 45, he won that decisively, 2016 as well as 2020. Where he struggled with older voters across the race spectrum. Folks who, especially folks over 65, he had a lot of trouble convincing. But one demographic that Bernie made enormous gains with from 2016 to 2020 was Latino voters. Latino voters really, quite frankly, powered his victories in California, the nation's largest state, and Nevada, which was the third state that voted. It's because he ran up, double-digit margins with Latino voters that really carried them across the finish line. So, I think for in the political space, every candidate, every issue item, you have to look at who you naturally appeal with. So for Bernie, in this case, it's young people, right? We knew that from the start. And even in 2016, you can sense that there was enormous energy with young voters for Bernie. But you also have to look at folks on the fence, that if you put a lot of time and effort and you start early, and you're not tacking it on at the end, you can make enormous gains. And that was this case with Latino voters. I think Bernie really, he invested early on. He hired from the community. Almost all of his messaging was bilingual, and it lifted up stories from people in the community. It was a very intentional way of organizing a campaign for a specific constituency that you rarely see. And that way, you can make gains among those people who are not your quote unquote natural audience.
Yeah, I think there's always a concern around pandering or appropriation. Just to stay with you for a second on how you feel Bernie was able to handle that, or any political
Yeah.
campaign.
So I think historically, the way you do outreach to quote unquote constituencies, right? So non-white male, is that you rush something towards the end, or you do something that's very on the nose. So for example, a lot of campaigns will, they will do their Spanish language or Chinese language or Arabic language ads very late in the game, let's say a month before election day, when you really got to start that very early on. When you start translating, your introductory email about who you are in another language 2 weeks out from election day, that's a little too late. You got to start earlier. And part of that is also within your message and how you communicate. In the old days, it was very common for politicians, let's say you're visiting a senior center of Chinese American seniors. It's very common for a politician to just, post a picture with them, have your cheesy thumbs up and say, I had a great day speaking with Chinese seniors. I love this community. And we laugh, but it was that on the nose. And I look at that and I always just say, why don't you just say something along the lines of, it was really great to talk about why we need to expand Social Security. We need to expand all of our, Medicare options for our elderly population, particularly our marginalized populations. Why don't you come from it from a more authentic issue-based way, as opposed to being, on the nose, and look at me with these, other people. I'm inclusive. But to bring it back in a way that I think is representative, is that I feel that whether you are a voter or you are a consumer of a product, people are pretty smart, and people can kind of tell bullshit, and people can tell who is pandering and who is genuinely trying to make a connection.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I agree. And even when you're doing that successfully, when you're saying, these are the issues that matter to me, I just happen to be with this community today, everyone can still hear that and still, respect the conversation. This is where it's truly applicable. So, and Chris, on your side, I think that pandering and appropriation are a big issue when it comes to music. How do you, plus the fact is that some of your artists reach huge swaths of community members, some of which do not even at all relate or respect the type of artist or identities that you have. I think music transcends all of those things. How do you address that when someone is, and I'm being super vague, but I'm sure I can come up with an example.
Yeah. So I mean, for us, I think it's a little bit of a different issue, because obviously a domestic political campaign it's a little bit more obvious when someone is pandering. But for music is universal, and it's always a two-way street. And so there's times where someone might hop on a remix with J Balvin or do something with BTS in Asia, and that's not considered so much pandering as expanding an audience. It's a two-way street, because the BTS fan gets American audience, and then the domestic fan gets a more Asian audience. And so I think that it's more natural to see it in that landscape with remixes and stuff like that. But then the negative side, obviously, is when an artist is all of a sudden overnight going after an audience that way. Wait, why are you doing this out of the blue? I mean, I obviously can't mention names, but we've all seen the signs where someone is singing country music one day and the next day they're twerking at the VMAs or something like that. It's like, wait a minute, something's not right here. So, I mean, I think that it's easier to spot it in music, and like the people who, honestly, if you don't have a good team around you to do like and even if you want to enter, because if someone wants to enter a new segment or new market or new demographic, we can't be so elitist or segregated, like just because you're this person, have this background, you can't come here. But if you want to do it, you have to start dropping the seed and start integrating your way in an authentic way from the beginning. It's like, it just can't be day and night, and like you have to earn your way into that community. Not earn, but like add value, and not just be seen to be parachuting in just as an opportunist.
Right. And so you're both saying sort of the same thing. It takes the seed planting and the conversations and the community. So what about somebody who just doesn't even know where to start on building their team or building those connections? You know, I think it shouldn't be, as you're saying, it should be authentic to the person, to their message. But I think so many people, and hopefully those people that we're targeting or that we're able to reach with this app, they're just going to be like, I have so much to say in this space, but I don't feel comfortable enough, or I don't feel worthy of being able to do that. What would you recommend to someone in that position?
So the first thing I would just say is that don't have imposter syndrome. And I think this affects women and people of color a lot. You see a lot of confidence in white men, quite frankly, in politics. But you don't always see it when you're not a white man. And so be confident in who you are. Don't diminish your life experiences. You know, you do not have to have worked in politics professionally for a decade, 2 decades, to want to be more involved in politics or to run for office. You know, there are so many life experiences that translate very well to the political side, because at the end of the day, politics is about communicating to people. It is about uplifting people, and it is about working to fight for someone's future, to make that better. And so there are so many things that you've done in life already that can translate very, very well. And don't overthink the simple things when you are just starting out. You do not have to overthink of, you know, how do I get the best YouTube stream? You know, how do I have the most polished one-liners and zingers? I think when you're just starting out at a grassroots level, it is your family, it is your friends. These are the people in your circle that you should look to for guidance and for support. And going back to that, you know, my earlier comment, you know, AOC, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, look, I mean, early on, a year before she won, no one knew who she was. She didn't have this team around her. She never had a big team around her when she won the first time, right? She was a funded grassroots campaign. And, but you could just kind of tell she did not need to have these, you know, expensive consultants feeding her a one-pager of liners. She naturally just spoke it. And you don't have to agree with everything she said. It just felt natural. And so that's my advice to folks. You know, don't overthink. Am I getting every single word and adjective and every single nuanced messaging right? Be yourself. You will find your voice. You will find your way on how to communicate to people, you know, naturally as you go about the political process.
Yeah, and I guess for me, it's more, I mean, in this era that we live in, I mean, before finding your audience, it's more about finding your voice. And obviously, like, whether it be politics or music, it's just finding what you stand for, educating yourself, and like kind of not going with the flow and creating your own identity and all that stuff. And then once you do, I mean, we live in the digital era where you don't have to find your audience will literally find you. And if you work on the first step of having something that stands out, then that audience will naturally grow over time and time. And like, I'm a big fan of finding those two things before you have a team, because once you go through all that stuff on your own and develop it and blah, 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 a team like this is like kind of like the same thing back when I said about finding your brand, like a team like Republic or a campaign team or anything like that can help amplify and organize and get out to the masses. But it all starts with you doing the work of finding that yourself, because if there's nothing to start with, imagine a fire. If a fire is too small to pour gas on and expand, then that fire is not going to grow. And so start with that bigger fire first, and then, yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add to that. I think to Chris's point, it has a lot of parallels in the political world because if you're running for office and you have to have a team of professional advisors force feeding you, these are the issues you should take. This is what you believe in. And honestly, I've had that happen before. Sometimes it's like, Trip, what should I do about immigration? I was like, well, let's fix the broken immigration system. If you have to have someone telling you what the position to take on every single issue, you probably shouldn't be in the game. Like you should have your folks kind of like, it's to Chris's point, amplifying and polishing it. But you got to have some of your values, and you have to do some deep soul searching on, what you want to communicate and what is important to you before you have a team of folks around you to polish it up.
Like creating a super group, a pop super group that nobody knows how to sing or dance.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Well, so I think backboards are also super important. And in this digital age, we can all get our own backboard from different platforms, from our audience base or, peers. And a lot of that can happen on social media or on video platforms. I think platforms are the biggest question for someone looking to start. Where do I start a YouTube? Do I start on Instagram? How do I figure it out? Trip, how do you determine what platforms your candidates need to be on?
Yeah, so there's some things in politics that are very universal, I feel, like across industries. A lot of it is, quite frankly, Facebook Live. It's a lot of right now ad spending is on Facebook, as well as just organically, right? Just posting a photo, posting a link. Twitter's big, Instagram is big. And there's a couple tools in politics that are relatively unique. You got to pick a software where you connect with voters, right? On the Democratic side, we usually use a software called VAN, Voter Activation Network. That's how we, track our knocking on doors, making the phone calls. And there's a bunch of softwares out there about texting. On the Bernie campaign, we actually developed that in-house. We call that the Burn app. And we're able to text masses of people. I think the Bernie campaign texted over 250 million users. So those are things that are very specific to politics, but there's obviously a lot of tools, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, that are universal, YouTube as well, that are universal. Actually, Bernie was able to leverage that pretty well. When we hit the pandemic and, you're no longer able to do these big in-person 20,000 person rallies, we went completely digital on the Bernie campaign. And, some of the videos that Bernie had where he brought in experts to talk about a healthcare issue, they reached over 2 million viewers on YouTube. So, some of these platforms do translate across industries.
Yeah, and I guess on my side, I mean, when choosing a platform, it's obviously the first step is just looking at the demographics of that platform. Obviously, Facebook is now skewing a little bit older. TikTok is a little bit younger. Twitter is a little bit in the middle, and then Instagram is kind of 24 to 32. And if either the audience that you have is similar to that, that's a good start. But then if your aspirational audience is there too, that's a good place to start as well. So once you do that, obviously, just because everyone doesn't really have a team or the bandwidth to do everything on their own, but you can work a lot more efficiently and seamlessly if you develop either a content calendar or strategy of what you want your presence to be on those platforms, just so you're not just digitally throwing up everything and then just figuring out later. Like you have a tight, concise, even if you post once a week, at least if that once a week post is consistent, then obviously that audience will grow. And the third layer is just making sure that the content you do is native to that platform. Like a 5-10 second TikTok, obviously uploading that to YouTube in the same format obviously won't work, but like if you do something where, okay, it's a compilation of 10 TikToks, that might translate a little bit better. So it's just a perfect storm of knowing the demographic of the platform, knowing what you want to do on the platform, and then executing.
And a lot of it on both sides is about creativity, about really speaking authentically. I think a lot of those things are also up for criticism. And once you put yourself out there, it's hard to know what to do. So in review, now we've talked through voice and how someone can establish who they are. You've lived these life experiences, you have an identity, and you really can dig deep into who you are to tell your story. I think that's hard for a lot of people, square one. Second, we've talked a bit about, building audience, understanding audience, and then on platforms. So here we are in a position where someone is telling their heart and soul, really enthusiastically sharing what they believe in on either a creative side or a political side. And they're starting to get a lot of feedback, some positive, some where people are actually enthusiastically, engaging and sharing their content, and then some negative. How do you recommend someone handle the trolls, the haters, and a lot of the people who may disagree with that person's lifestyle, with that person's story?
Yeah. My take on that is, in politics, you're naturally going to get haters and trolls from your own party, from another party, from people who are usually not engaged anyways. I tend to think like I would just wear it as a badge of honor. If you're getting to the point where people are trolling you on your Facebook post, that means you're probably close to making it, or you've made it already, right? Like you're significant enough that someone would take their time to try to downgrade you, and like that's a big badge of honor to me. If you get to the point where you never have people criticizing you, and yet you're a public figure in politics, then you probably haven't really made it yet. So I would just wear it as a badge of honor.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the areas are two different areas, because I mean, in politics, you're naturally going to get someone to oppose you. That's the nature of politics. But with music, it comes in different stages, I would say. Like, I mean, there's nothing more courageous and gut-wrenching than being an artist and putting yourself out there early. At the early stages, I mean, some of the stuff might just be haters being haters, but the great thing with digital is it's real-time feedback. And in the past, that same level of feedback back in the 50s, you would have to press a vinyl, put it out, and then wait. But like the constant feedback loop, once you eliminate all the noise, it's actually there could be valuable insights that you can take and learn and improve your craft. And like half of even with me, like you always have to be open to learning and innovating and taking feedback and taking criticism. But then ultimately, once you get to a higher level, most times the criticism is just either people hating or people just trolling to be trolls. So like, I mean, I think criticism in the early stages is good, and you should take some of it serious. But then as you go up, the criticism becomes less critics and more just trolls.
I've definitely been around a lot of musicians who, for example, I mean, I talk about this too much, but whenever they see their Pitchfork score and they're like, "Oh my God, I can't believe this is going to ruin my entire life."
Yeah.
You can't see it that way anymore. I hope.
The bigger you get, like honestly, you shouldn't even be reading the comments, because it's just like, yeah, it just will put you in such a negative mind space that like some 13-year-old kid in Sheboygan, Wisconsin shouldn't have that effect on you.
Right. And we should say the same for politicians, especially one in particular.
Yeah.
Not talking about him. So one thing I think that's important across all platforms too is calls to action. So, we've gotten our voice, we've figured out our audience, we're talking to them. I feel like just like pandering, calls to action can just be as grating. For you, Trip, most of the time calls to action are, sign a petition, get out the vote. Let's do these very particular things. How do you feel you can harness the power that you've developed in these digital platforms to get people out to do something?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is about getting buy-in in a movement and buy-in in a culture. And by what I mean by that is, anyone can say, hey, at the end of this speech, please volunteer. I need you to knock on doors. I need you to share my video on Facebook. And that is fine, right? As a one-off, though, I don't know how effective that is by itself. The most effective buy-ins are when you are encouraging people that, if I win, or if we do well, and if our movement continues to do well in the years to come, that we'll have a better future for our family and for our kids. And you make it movement-based and you make it generational-based, right? I think that's why some of the success that you've seen with Bernie Sanders in the last 5 years, right? Like, I really feel that he has pulled the Democratic Party and the country in a certain progressive direction. 5 years ago, people weren't talking about $15 minimum wage. Now every person who is not a Republican, who is a Democrat, is saying, I support a $15 minimum wage, right? So a lot of this is basically getting buy-in from the movement, right? I need you to do X, Y, and Z. I need you to knock on doors. I need you to make phone calls. We're going to have a better country, right? So it's movement based. It's not just for one election cycle. It is about building, planting the seeds for future successes. Because at the end of the day, like, I also want to humble myself. Like, Bernie Sanders is not going to become president, right? Like, he technically did lose, even if he came in, second place out of 20 something Democratic contenders. But if you succeed in terms of your movement and you plant the seeds for future successes, you can see a lot of successes in the future.
Yeah, there are so many victories in what you guys did. So don't
Yeah.
you dare disparage yourself. I think it's important also that you're continuing to have conversations like this to help people understand how to take that power. I mean, it's still powerful, the change that took place from the campaign alone. And I hope people were able to take away that the human element of it all, because I think that was accomplished so well in those campaigns. Chris, conversely, I think that there's also super clear calls to action, which include purchasing or sharing content, sometimes even just liking or adding or subscribing or whatever. How do you feel that those are best accomplished with the type of people you're working with?
I mean, I think it's two levels as well. Like, obviously, the bigger people, they kind of support what Trip does. Is like their call to action can actually be the catalyst to change, and like bringing eyes on issues or opportunities and all that stuff. But I mean, obviously, when you're an emerging artist, the call to actions are more self-serving, I guess, for artist growth, artist development. And yeah, I mean, the call to actions are, the click, like, comment, subscribe. But I think that there is download, ticket sales. I mean, through digital, I think that's the especially like Instagram and platforms like that. Those are the big opportunity platforms where there's opportunities to see those real-time call to actions and engagements and insights and stuff like that.
And so for both of you, in person and in real life experiences really do matter to the way campaigns are done. Trip, on your side, rallies and just conferences, press conferences, etc. Chris, with concerts and meetups, etc. How do you think things might change? I mean, I know we're not all psychics, but just eager to hear how these things could evolve.
Chris, you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. So obviously with us, experiential live events, I mean, it's either promo around an album where artists are going to do the radio circuit, all that stuff, or just the traditional touring, which more and more has become such a big revenue stream. The effects of that not being there, I mean, obviously there's a financial implication, but for some of our smaller acts, touring and all that stuff is how you get your word out to the masses in real life experience, where people can always have a personal connection to that first time you saw Justice at Coachella, or the first time you saw Jay-Z at Madison Square, or whatever it is. But I mean, now more and more we're seeing that usually what happens whenever you have a bunch of creatives locked in one space, it leads to an era of creativity and innovation. So now, I mean, we're seeing more and more artists do things with the live stream space, which hopefully it'll be the catalyst for live streams to really kick off and go. But I think that you're seeing artists shoot self-music videos at their house and do creative things in that avenue. So, I mean, I think the live experiential aspect is changing, but it's evolving. And I think that, I mean, even in theatrical release, you see with Trolls Worldwide, that has started a domino effect in the theatrical release, where it's like, okay, well, maybe we won't give these movie theaters 45% of distribution fee and release directly video on demand. So I think it's going to lead to innovations in all areas. And like, I mean, experiential will always be a place, but yeah.
Yeah. I think on our end in politics, you have to be very creative with building a sense of community and culture. So much of really the hard work in politics, that is getting done because that is individuals who feel invested as a community, invested in each other. The classic example is that, if you're volunteering for a political candidate, you might be in an office with 20 other people. And, it's incumbent upon someone like me as the organizer to make sure that people have a good experience, right? So if people are making calls in a 3-hour period in a dungy, storefront office, I would, take it upon myself. You probably want to order pizza for folks. You probably want to be chatting them up and learning about them, in between their volunteering experiences. I usually like to brew coffee for people. Like, you want to make sure that they feel appreciated, right? You can't do that online, obviously, right? Like, there's only so much a Zoom call or Zoom settings can take you. So you really have to be creative with making people feel appreciated, feel that, maybe making folks feel that like they have a sense of community. And so, what we have experimented with since the pandemic, and a bunch of my clients who are running for local office in New York, we're trying to experiment with is, when you have these Zoom calls, don't just do an introduction, send people off for 2 hours to make calls on their own, and then have a debrief back. You want to check in on them. We do check-ins every 30 minutes, every hour, check in with people individually. You want people to talk more about themselves, and not just in a political setting, but how was your health doing? How's your family doing? And then you give a lot of appreciation, to your folks. You give them a lot of shout outs. There's a lot of things that you need to do, like creatively, to simulate that type of community, that type of culture. What I always love to do on the Burning campaign is that every time we have a big volunteer meetup on Zoom, I would bring in a political celebrity. So I brought in Ocasio once. I brought in some of our, state senators that are, more high impact. And these volunteers love hearing from them, right? Like they feel like, that it's a cool experience to be kicking it with them. So you really just have to go in politics. You have to go above and beyond right now and be creative and building more personal touches and building more personal rapport, because you can't be in an office. You can't be in an office with 20 other volunteers, or you can't be in a rally with 20,000 people. You have to simulate some type of that human connection somehow.
Yeah, things can still be once in a lifetime experiences, even if it's just a few people in a chat room. So that's great. I mean, there has to be some sort of achievement or reward system with the community that you're looking to build. And it's not nefarious. It's meant to be authentic to the person that's speaking. And I think all of that is great. And I'm eager to see how things shift, and how we can become closer through these digital means. So we're going to start shifting to our Q&A. We're opening up the chat space here for you guys to ask any questions that you might have. But I'd like to take an opportunity for Trip and Chris to add any tips, any thoughts, anything we may not have covered in this chat.
Tips and tricks. I mean, I think throughout this conversation, we've kind of painted the opportunities, the strategies, and then how to get started. I mean, I think the number one takeaway from all this is, no matter what vertical you're in industry, like, now is a time where even if you look at recorded music, before you traditionally had to either be physically hand someone a demo or be one of the people who are selected from a few A&Rs at the label, but through digital, the discovery of artistry and the analytics and data to back up why someone's hot is more readily available than ever. So I think now is a time where if you have a voice and you have something interesting to say, you have the passion, anything is possible. Digital, the platforms and that is one thing, but it all boils down to the passion of doing all the hard work that it takes from going from 0 to 100. And when people get there, people just see where they're at now, but don't see the hard work that's put in before it. So.
Yeah, I would just add to that I think right now, the pandemic has made what people are doing in the political world even that much more important. So if you're running for office right now and your election's in 1 month or it's in a year from now, I do strongly think that people are going to remember you for what you're doing right now, right? They might not remember what you did 6 months ago, but what are you in a position where you're helping deliver food to needy seniors? Are you in a position to do mutual aid with your neighbors? Are you in a position to check in with your neighbors online. I think that people remember that more so than ever. On a similar but different way, I think, here in New York back in 2012, Superstorm Sandy just devastated a lot of communities, especially the parts in New York that obviously bordered water, right? In 2013 in New York, we had a major gear where we had a lot of the city-wide offices, from mayor on down to city council. They were open and they had a lot of candidates. And for voters in 2013 in New York who lived in areas like Lower Manhattan or Sunset Park or Red Hook, these areas that border water just completely devastated by Superstorm Sandy. I remember back then the candidates who actually did stuff in 2012 when Super Sandy hit and cared for their neighbors and checked on their neighbors. Voters remember that. And that's not to say like this is a transactional, you deliver a free sandwich to an elder, you have their vote, right? Because that's not what this is about. This is not a transactional type of exchange, but it's really more about, if you were out there and you genuinely cared and you were out there without the cameras on and you were connecting with people one-on-one, people remember that months later.
Perfect. So I think that may dovetail into one of our first questions, Lacey.
Yeah, so we have a question specifically for Trip, and I think it is along those lines. How do you think the lack of in-person canvassing and voting opportunities will affect turnout for people of color, which is a demographic that the Democratic Party doesn't do a great job reaching out to? Questioner. And what can we do as citizens to effectively organize phone banks virtually?
Yeah. Hey, Quinny, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. We actually had met, I believe, 2 years ago at an event in DC. So it's good to see you again. Yeah. Small world.
See you.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was on the receiving end of this, and I know from personal experience, I was on the Hillary Clinton general election in 2016, and I had a couple states in the mid-Atlantic East Coast area. And one of the big takeaways from that election, of course, is that, I thought Hillary Clinton was such an enormously, super qualified, super excellent candidate. But for some reason, the campaign, when you compare it to 2012, unfortunately, Barack Obama is still the gold standard of building a Democratic coalition. It is very true that with non-white voters, but specifically Black voters, the turnout for Hillary Clinton just wasn't there in 2016 as it was for Obama in 2008 and 2012. It is a very deep question, a loaded question. There's not a lot of simple solutions to that. But I genuinely do think that the voters that are quote unquote harder to reach, if they are non-white voters, you always have to start from the beginning. You have to start early, right? Like I think in New York on the local level, I am so used to candidates kind of translating, their lit piece into Spanish or Chinese a month out before election day. And then they finally like unveil it to people. Or most people don't even have a website translate another language, right? If it comes late or if it comes at all. And so you have to start early. You have to start intentional. You have to start organizing intentionally. You have to make sure that you're doing intentional, authentic engagement very early on in the process, as opposed to later in the process. You see this with presidential campaigns as well, and I think that's one of the reasons why the Democratic Party didn't do as well in 2016. You can't be doing this type of stuff in October 2016. You have to be doing this stuff in May of that year. And to answer your other question, Quinny, I think as citizens, I think there's so much that we can do to organize phone banks virtually. The obvious step is to reach out to a campaign. It doesn't have to be the presidential. I'm gonna obviously be supporting Joe Biden this year, but it can be folks running for Congress, running for a local office in your neighborhood to plug in with their campaign. And I'll also say this: people who do politics and campaigns professionally do not have the answers. They 100% don't, even if they come off in a very confident way. I feel like you as a citizen, if you have ideas, you should proactively be bringing that, to these campaigns, to these candidates for office. And if they're smart, they'll take some of your good ideas.
I think that is exactly right. Okay, last question for both of you. How might your strategies differ for a more passive audience? What are your tips on reaching folks who might just generally be harder to get to?
That's a good question. I would say for a more passive audience, I mean, it just breaking through within a more creative way or skill set. Or I mean, the thing about the internet is, especially on platforms like Facebook, on YouTube, you have to find the video, but on Facebook, the video literally finds you. So I guess it would be going to a platform that has a more discovery feature and doing something that breaks out and grabs their attention. I mean, because no matter how passive you are, I mean, if something grabs your attention, it'll grab your attention. And Facebook sometimes, or Twitter, is more suitable to do that.
I would say on the political end, and to tie this, quite frankly, to music and entertainment, what I hope you'll see more from politics is that politics will be embracing the arts and music and culture much more. And it should be something that should be part of our program. And I'll just give two examples. I thought one of the things that Bernie did really well is that Bernie's someone who, you know, when you go back to his time being a mayor in Burlington, Vermont, he always prioritized the arts and the culture. And you saw that reflect in the presidential campaign. You know, he had these enormous production value. There were concerts with the Strokes, for example, right before the New Hampshire primary. He had a massive concert with Public Enemy in California with 17,000 people in the Staples Center. And this was just something that you normally don't see in politics before. Previously, what you get is that, you know, you'd probably have, you know, John Bon Jovi headlining an Obama or Hillary rally, like acoustically with the guitarists just themselves, right? Like, that is really cool. But Bernie went full-fledged concert with the lights and the production values. It was incredible to see. You just never saw that. And so on a large scale level, if you can dole out hundreds of thousands of dollars at a presidential level to put on one of these massive concerts that really merge politics and the arts, that is something that really, you know, it's innovative, and you're reaching people who may not just be interested in politics. You're reaching a more passive audience. So on the local level, and a more, you know, kind of day-to-day level, maybe that's, let's say you're trying to run for office in Brooklyn or LA. Maybe you bring on like a local musical act, right, that has their own kind of local following, and you have them perform a set like in between speeches. I really think that there's a huge future to incorporate more music and the arts into political programming. And it's one of these creative ways that, you know, in politics, we always have to think about reaching people who are just, you know, not inclined to be involved.
I feel like I smell a collab. We should find a Republic artist to make a politician and blow it out of the water.
I'll hit you up, Chris.
Yeah, please.
Oh my gosh. Well, I have loved this conversation. This has truly been a wonderful, I could just keep going. I have so many continued questions, but this was hugely helpful, I'm sure. And we'll be adding this to our app, creating clips and everything to share. So thank you guys so much for being a part of it.
Yep.
Thank you, Maria.
Yep. Thank you so much, Maria, Lacey, Alyssa, the team. Shout out to Chris. This was a lot of fun. Thank you to the audience.
All right, bye.